I didn't get to finish last week, and also because last week was not recorded. So we're gonna do a brief kind of a recapitulation of where we've been. And I want to finish it. It occurred to me there were really a couple of important points I really wanted to make at the end of last week's class that I didn't get to because we ran out of time. This class is really it's about three legs on a stool. Okay, these are three kind of foundational issues that we've been studying and talking about how we can truly be countercultural in this world in which we live. People are so angry, and there is so much outrage in our culture. David Brooks, New York Times columnist, who I greatly admire, he's a conservative thinker, and he talks about how there's this, and I can't remember the exact word that he used, but there's this, it just seems like our culture is suffused with kind of a meanness, and that it's more and more prevalent. People are giving themselves more and more permission to be able to act out, if you will, to do. I saw the woman Friday, I think, was sentenced to 17 years in federal prison because she punched a Southwest Airlines flight attendant. I mean, you know, that doesn't happen on every flight, obviously. But the fact that we live in a day and an age where people can become so outraged that they resort to physical violence is, of course, I guess people have always done that. But we've talked about three things. The first week we talked about kindness, countercultural kindness, and how we were going to respond in kindness to people because that's what Jesus called us to. Last week we began talking about countercultural community, and we did that using a passage in Colossians. And this was the first part of the passage. Then we began to talk about some things that the next section of Colossians tells us. But notice he says, get rid of anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language. You take off the old self and its practices. You put on the new self. And then we talked about how these barriers and distinctions between people because of the gospel are broken down. And so then we started talking about, in the next passage, what do we do to create the kind of community that will allow us to be truly countercultural? What is it that can make us different from the world? And the first thing was we want to look like Jesus. We're God's chosen people, holy, dearly loved. Holy does not mean pure. It means set apart. And we talked about the dangers of thinking of yourself as set apart, because what you can begin to think is that not only are you set apart, but that you're better than, right, other people. But you clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. So we take off all of these outrageous characteristics of the world and the way we operate in the flesh, and we put on these things like compassion and kindness, humility, gentleness, that patience. That helps us look like Jesus. And then we forbear and we forgive, and I use the word forbear on purpose. That's the King James Version. He says, bear with each other, forbearing one another, and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And so now we're talking about not only are we to forbear or to, and that word means much more than being patient. It's about being tolerant. Let me see what the definition, I've kind of been flying through all this, but I liked the definition that we talked about last week. Here we are. That it means to be tolerant, understanding, and empathetic. So it's not just patience, it's not just being kind, it's trying to put yourself in another person's shoes. It's about trying to understand where they're coming from. When we talked about kindness, we talked about the two questions. One question we should stop asking, and one question we should start asking. We stop asking, what's wrong with that person? What is wrong with them? That's the wrong question. The right question is, what has happened to that person? What has brought them to this point? The first question is just judgmental. The second question seeks solutions and says, okay, it is trying to understand. And this is the same idea here. We are forbearing with one another. We are tolerant, understanding, empathetic, because that's the foundation of forgiveness. You can't forgive if you're not tolerant, and you can't forgive if you're not understanding. You can't forgive if you're not empathetic. And then he says, you forgive as the Lord forgave you. And so now we're talking about the quality of the forgiveness that we extend. And this is Paul's linking this forbearance and forgiveness to the very heart of the gospel. Now that's not always easy, is it? Kim and I was going to talk about this later, but Kim and I last Sunday went to see the new Downton Abbey film. Don't judge me. It was delightful. I have a heart for Downton Abbey, not because I really love Downton Abbey, it's because I have a heart for my wife. And so we watched all the episodes together, and we've seen the movies. And so we went to see the movie. And before the movie, how many of y'all have recently even gone to a movie? A few, okay. They have multiple screens before the movie telling you to turn off your cell phone. Turn off your cell phone. There's even a screen now where it's all white and it says, this is how bright your phone is to the people around you. Be kind and considerate. There are 2 or 3, 4 reminders to turn off cell phones, to not be on your cell phone during the movie. Just during the movie. And so we're watching Downton Abbey, and the woman, we're on the back row. The woman next to me cannot stay off her phone. She's keeping it tilted down, but it's still lighting. It's very distracting for me. And I say that to say this. It reminded me of just how easily it is for me to get irritable and mad. I wanted to turn my phone on. I wanted to do this and just hold it over the woman. And I thought that'll show her. And then I thought that'll get me punched in the nose by her husband probably. So you can't, again, because we live in an age of outrage and you can't do hardly anything without running afoul of somebody. So it's so easy to get irritated, but we put off the flesh, Paul says, and we put on the Spirit. It takes effort to forbear some people. Some of you are really easy to take, and some of you are not. Okay? That's human nature. Some people are more easygoing, and some people are more challenging. But what a true community does is it accepts everyone and is patient and tolerant and understanding and empathetic and understands that everybody is not at the same place along the continuum. Am I making any sense? Okay. Now, there are a couple, that's where we were up to last week. Now we're into a new territory. Another thing we do to be a countercultural community is we lead with love. Okay? We lead with love. Paul says, over all these virtues, you put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Now, there's still this word picture going on about clothing. You take off some things, and then you begin to clothe yourself with some other things. Now, in the ancient world, there was a tunic, which was kind of an undergarment. There were cloaks and there were coats. There were things on the outside, and over all of those things, there was kind of a belt that they would use to hold everything together. And I think that's the imagery that Paul is going for here. You're talking about compassion and kindness and gentleness. And how do you do that? How do you hold all of that together? You bind them all together in love. Think about a belt. In those days, the belt was on the outside. It was the outermost portion of the clothing, right? So it was always visible. It was never hidden. It was the first thing. It was the first thing people would see. So we're putting on these virtues: compassion, kindness, patience, and we're holding them all together with love. And if people see that love, they see the Christ who lives within us. Remember the two things we've been emphasizing. We want to be Christ. We want to see Christ in everyone. And we talked about that last week. But we also want to be Christ for everyone. This missional move that we're trying to make here at Northside is going to be, I think, difficult for many people, because we're going to end up doing church very differently than we do it now. I don't know if it will be radically different, but it will be very different. There is going to be a different emphasis. There's going to be a different, what we do on Sunday mornings is going to be less important. What we do during the week as we move out into the community is going to be more important. The things that we do here, we still want to do we want to be excellent, and we want to do things well. But there may be some changes that need to happen so that people, when they do come here, they feel more comfortable being here. So it's going to be about letting go of preferences. It's going to be about trying to seek the needs and the good of the other person instead of ourselves. And the only thing that allows us to do that is love. Now, how do you think most people define, of course I've tipped my hand. I think love is how you define Christian maturity. Maturity. I think there's a time I would have thought Christian maturity is defined, but I don't know, how do you think some people would define Christian maturity? Instead of me just lecturing, let me ask you, what are the different ways people define Christian maturity?
Well, a lot of people would think that means very knowledgeable
Okay.
scriptures.
Okay. All right, I think that's right.
Presenting a good face.
So moral behavior, maybe? Okay. Knowledge, moral behavior. I think those are important. I'm not saying they're not, but I don't think that's the main way you define Christian maturity. I think you define it by love. And agape love in action. Right? I'm not saying those other things aren't important. I'm just saying I don't think that's the main. And I think that's the way Paul sees it as well. You remember, this is in 1 Corinthians 13. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. The big deal in Corinth was speaking in tongues, and maybe even angelic tongues. And Paul says you can do that, but if you don't have agape love in action in your life, you're just making noise. That's all you're doing. You're just making noise. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries, if I've got great head knowledge of the Bible, and I can point you to all the minutiae, I can win Bible trivia contests because I know the text so well. If I can do all of that, and if I have a deep understanding of the mysteries of God, and have all knowledge, if I've got a faith that can move mountains, but I don't have love, agape love in action, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor, I liquidate all my assets, and I give all my money to poor people. If I give my body over to hardship that I may boast, in other words, if I become a martyr for the sake of Christ but do not have love, I gain nothing. Now these three remain: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. See, I don't think we define Christian maturity the way Paul does. Let me go where angels fear to tread for just a moment. I'm leaving in December anyway. I struggled with masks, the mask mandate, okay? When our leadership here asked people to wear a mask because of the pandemic. And there were some people who just wouldn't do it. Just wouldn't do it. And I think the reason they wouldn't do it, for some, was that they felt like it was being faithless. Okay? Faithless. We trust God. It seems like we need to be trusting God to take care of us. And so it seems kind of faithless for me to have to do this thing and wear this mask. And what I wanted to tell those people, and never did, maybe I'm telling you now if you're one of them. Paul says the greatest of these is not faith. The greatest of these is love. And the reason we wear a mask is because we love other people. Because it cuts down on the possibility of us spreading the germ to others. That's the motive behind this. The greatest of these is not faith. The greatest of these is not hope. The greatest of these is love. Loving action. So I can have a faith that trusts God to carry me through the pandemic. But if I don't have loving action towards others, then my faith means nothing. That's how I read that. Anybody got a rebuttal? I'm willing to hear a rebuttal or a different opinion. Yeah.
Just did any of those people let snakes bite them?
What do you mean?
If they're so faithful that they think God is going to protect them, did any of them let a snake bite them?
Don't bring logic into this thing, man.
There are people who profess to be Christians who handle.
Oh, of course, there's a whole segment of fundamentalist Christianity that does that very thing. You know, because Paul.
I'm just saying that they're two-faced.
So, and the point I'm trying to make here is that a loving, a countercultural community leads with love. That's our first impulse. Not judgment, not criticism. Our first impulse is to be Christ in the lives of others, and so we lead with love. That's our first impulse, our first inclination. And then, yes, go ahead.
What is the result when that approach that says I'm leading with love, and someone else says, but you're and not the man.
Right. This. Okay.
In the checkings that you talk about, how does that play into? Well, we don't care what you think because this is what we think is the right thing because it's the loving thing. Maybe this person says that this is the loving thing. So how do you blend those together?
Can you give me an example?
Well, not without indicting myself.
Gotcha. I think. Here's what I think. I think when Jack was doing at the Blue Hole, and one of the things that struck me during one of those classes was when he quoted John Stevens, who was the chancellor at ACU, and John Stevens said there is no topic that we should not be able to discuss. And so I would say when you lead with love, then that creates an atmosphere where people can share contrary views or differing views, put it that way. And we actually give each other a hearing instead of we get into an argument and immediately start to formulate responses, and right? So we're really trying, and I'm not telling you I'm good at this. I'm saying because my go-to is I'm already thinking about responses to what you're trying to tell me. I can't even listen to you completely because of that. And that's on me. That's horrible.
Well, I probably visit more churches of Christ than most anyone in this class of all.
Well, because you work with, tell everybody what you do.
Well, I work with World Bible School, and I go to congregations all over the state, in various states, and I present what we do. And, I find some congregations that say, we're not going to have anything to do with you because you're too liberal, which is really strange. And other churches And so somewhere in between is this place where people go, we just want to teach about Jesus. And the thing that I guess frustrates me more than anything is to say, okay, here's this church that won't fellowship this church because they don't agree with them, but they're not loving each other because they are not loving Jesus in the right way. And it just amazes me that we can be so unkind to our brethren. And I'm not talking about the world, but see, I believe Satan does that to keep us from ministry.
Oh, I think there's no doubt that is the case. I think
He keep us fighting. We don't have to worry about it.
we take autonomy, which can be a good value, although it's not a biblical value. But we take autonomy to the point to where we're invisible to one another. I'm coming to the end of my career. Now, I know other ministers in other denominations who, because of the way those denominations are organized and operate, that they're able to take care of retiring ministers. But we don't, do we? It's you're on your own. Sink or swim. If it's to be, it's up to me, right? And part of the reason there is because we don't cooperate with one another. And I think when you lead with love, I think leading with love is when you do that, Christ comes to the fore. I've always said, I used an illustration, I don't know where I first saw it, because it's not original with me, nothing's original. But where I had people, I talked about how the tendency is for us to fellowship people who are to our right theologically and methodologically, and disfellowship people who are to our left theologically and methodologically. And so what I did, and I've done this here at Northside, I've said, okay, everybody, open your arms in fellowship. Do y'all understand what I'm talking about? We're okay with being with people who are more, I'm going to use the words conservative and liberal, not the way we really should use them, but the way we normally use them. And the way we normally use them is incorrect. But we're willing to be with people and accept people who are like us and more conservative than we are. And we tend to not have anything to do with people who are left of us, more liberal. We consider them more liberal than us. And so what I'll do is I'll have people, hang on, Jerry, I'll have people say, okay, everybody stand up and turn, come walk across the pews, y'all get in a line, everybody turn in fellowship to the person on your right. And we turn, and so all I'm doing now is I'm looking at the back of the person beside me because they're turning to their right, and they're turning to their right, and they're turning to their right. And so there is no fellowship the way we use it. And then I have everybody face the front and join hands and face the cross. Now suddenly, Jesus and the cross is the center, and that's what our focus is. And so there's nothing we can't talk about. That make sense? Okay. And then, Jerry, what are you going to say? And then we're going to move on.
Every week we take the Lord's Supper, communion. You gotta remember the first communion, there was Levi or Matthew, a tax collector, and there was Simon the Zealot. The Zealots were the rebels who were fighting Romans. Matthew was for the Romans. But they were able to put away all that literal violence and war, put it behind them, and follow Christ.
Yeah.
And following Christ is more important than Jewish liberation or service to the Romans.
The greatest of these is love. Okay? So you lead with love. And then, over all these virtues, that's that passage again. Then you dwell in peace. Let the peace of Christ rule in your heart, since as members of one body you were called to be, and be thankful. Called to peace and be thankful. I think the reason, and this is one of the things I wanted to mention this morning that I didn't mention last week. I think the reason some people are so outraged and fearful, we operate on a lot of fear in our culture. We're afraid they're going to take away XYZ, whoever they are. We're fearful. I think the reason a lot of people are angry is because they're fearful. Is that making sense? I think they get fearful. I think the kid in Buffalo who survived the racist shooting was fearful of what they call, what's it called? Replacement theory? That immigrants are going to come in and replace white people. That was his fear. In Charlottesville, the guys, there was a video of the guys marching with tiki torches in the run up to the conflict between the groups and the guy that ran his car through and what they were shouting was, "Jews will not replace us. Jews will not replace us." So that's a racist theory called replacement theory. That other people are going to come into this country and replace us. And that creates fear. And so we become angry. I think fear is a huge part of the outrage that happens in our culture. Y'all, what do y'all think of that?
Without a doubt.
Okay, so I'm just being self-evident here and then, okay. To be countercultural is to not operate in fear. It's to operate from a perspective of peace. And so that's where we dwell. By the way, according to, if you read the passage that we've looked at, multiple times Paul has talked about gratitude and being thankful. What's the connection between living peacefully and being thankful, do you think?
We think we appreciate what we have. Once you appreciate what you have, you don't desire more. You don't need more.
Okay.
You also think what Christ gave that, you will desire.
So that creates a sense of peace because you don't feel like you've got enough and you don't feel like you need more. Okay, who else? Jerry? Jerry.
If we understand what's in store for us, where we're going, then we know that all of this is temporary. We don't need it. We've got wonderful things in front of us, and we have assurance. So that makes me peace. That makes me peaceful. I don't have to worry about stuff in this world.
Don't get me wrong here. Go ahead, Andrea.
I also think by being thankful and having a thankful nature, it takes the focus off of you so much as
Okay.
you, not, and puts it somewhere else or on someone else.
I think it's, and I'm not getting on to you, Jerry, but I just want to make this point. It's easy for me to be thankful when I basically have everything I already need. Right? I just want to keep, and what Jerry, you're absolutely right, that we have such a great inheritance kept in heaven for us. However that ends up being true. That takes the focus off the here and now, but we don't want to do that to the exclusion of the fact that there are people in need, obviously, and we want to be generous. Thankfulness leads to peace because it, again, I think Andrew's right, it takes the focus off ourselves and puts it on to others. Yeah.
About a week and a half ago, Karen and I were sitting at breakfast in Oklahoma City with an individual, and the lady that was taking care of us was
not what's wrong with them, but what's their story, put it that way. I love that. There was a billboard, I don't know, back in the 80s or 90s in San Francisco that won an award. It was from a church, and I think it was like a Lutheran church or something, but it had a picture of Jesus on the cross with his, with the nails, and it said, "We accept piercings too." And one of the ways we're going to have to change when we talk about being missional is that we're going to have to accept a lot more blue hair. And I'm not talking about those of us who are older. I'm talking about people that dye their hair blue. Okay? People that are inked. That was the one thing I told Tyler and Caitlin. Do not get a tattoo. That is unreversible. At least back then it was. Don't do that. That's where I draw the line. I told Tyler, I don't care if you get an earring, doesn't bother me a bit. I don't care if you grow your hair long, not a problem. Don't get a tattoo. And he didn't. But again, I have a bias against that. But there are people in our congregation, you know this, right, that are well inked. Now they don't always show it, but I could name you a couple of people right now that are very much at the center of the heart of this church who have had many tattoos. But I mean, that again, we're talking about the change that we have to undergo. A lot of it's attitudinal. A lot of it is cultural. It's just let's let go of some of this stuff. We're not going to look down our nose at anybody. We're going to accept them. We don't ask what is wrong with them. We just say, tell us what's your story. Tell us your story. Nadia Bowles Weber is a tremendous minister and theologian, and she's written some great books, and she has covered, I want to say she has a history in Churches of Christ, at least the beginning, not now, but she's just covered in tattoos from head to toe. And she's such an insightful theologian and thinker and great preacher. And I'm not saying we're all going to go get tattoos. I'm still not going to get a tattoo. But, all right, let me keep going because I'm out of time. Go ahead, Ian.
I was just going to say, I appreciate the thought about, not to be led by fear, but I think as we hear scriptures, that there's over 300 God telling us not to be afraid, part of acceptance is that there is fear. And it's not just kind of to ignore it and let's move on and let's just lead by love, but the fact is that there is fear. And so then as part of the acceptance and part of the non-judgment of, okay, again, where's this person?
Right.
Where's this group coming from? Where's this person coming from? And validating and acknowledging, and then of course there's those conversations, right, that we have to help reframe that fear. But I think we also have to be careful not to just rush over fear, because those fears can be real to people.
Yeah.
And so
It's about processing fear, right? We obviously don't want ultimately to be controlled by fear, but we want to process fear. Yeah, I don't want to give the idea that that's like wrong, but it is wrong if you don't try to process. Eric?
When I was a kid in the school in Germany, all through the war, they had religion twice a week. Catholic kids, Catholic priests came, the Protestants preach again. The kids were stuff in Christ and stuff in the altar. And then toward the end, the teachers taught religion in the war in Parliament. And they destroyed everything we learned before. First thing they said was the Jews that killed Jesus. So that's how they turn you around in your mind.
Yeah.
At times.
Yeah. Jerry, then we got to go. Got to hurry.
Paul talks a lot about the spirit, that we are spiritual warfare in all the forces of the world.
Yeah, I do agree that the forces of fear seek to divide us, and what Christ's love does is seek to bring us together. Okay, so here are the two things we've talked about, and what I was going to spend half our class talking about was the third leg of the stool. That leg will be a little short because I've got like 5 minutes, and that's countercultural presence. May.
Well, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but when we start in accepting everybody, you know, like you were talking about, let's accept the disabled also, okay?
That's a great point. A great point.
Because person out there in here since 81, I think, and Stanley grew out here, he eventually was accepted. Terry Joe was never accepted. And now then, I listened to Bill,
Maverick. Maverick.
he squeals when he's happy. One lady said to me, why in the world does that child squeal? I said, he's happy. She said, can't they teach him anything other than squeal? Well, I tell you what, if you want to see true religion, go to Abilene, go to Richard Jones Police Services, walk in that activity center, and you will see true religion.
Yeah, Richard Beck, who's the dean of the head of the psychology department at ACU, and also a very thoughtful guy, has a great blog called Experimental Theology. He was asked one time to do an evaluation of a mega church, and I don't know if it was in Abilene or someplace else. And so he went and kind of observed what were their worship services and all that kind of stuff, and then he did a report, and he got together with the leadership, and they said, "Well, what do you think?" And he said, "Well, there's no death here." And this is what he meant by that. Everything was perfect. Everything looked great. But there was no one visible in a wheelchair. Everyone was perfect. And he said that's going to hold you back because it makes it to where you're not real. So you bring up an excellent point, which I would rather spend the rest of our time talking about necessarily than presence. One of the ways we've got to accept people, Maverick, you know the old joke about the old story about the preacher that's preaching this, and this little single mother had all these kids on the pew with her, and they were giving her such a hard time, and the guy was preaching, and finally she just kind of gave up and bundled up the kids and started to walk out, and the preacher stopped and said, "Ma'am, you need to understand, your kids are not bothering my preaching." And her response was, "Yes, but your preaching is bothering my children." So when Mavy's clapping or doing whatever, to me that's a joyous sound. The fact that here is someone who is severely autistic, but is finding a place. We have a special needs ministry where people spend time. They're dedicated to spend time with Maverick. We've converted one of the offices or the counseling rooms up here in the office wing into a sensory room for Maverick. We're about to turn that glassed-in library. That whole thing is going to be a sensory center for autistic children. And so that's that idea. Again, not understanding that these people aren't bothering us. These people are the heart of the gospel. The kingdom of God belongs to such as these. So we love children and of all kinds. Go ahead, May. Go ahead.
We went to Abilene one Sunday, and we went to church in Terry Joe. And as they were going into that class, the Bible school teacher said, "Would y'all like to go into the class with Terry Joe?" We said, "Sure we would." So we went in. The teacher got up, she started talking. It was Age of Outrage.
Wow.
Talking about the bunnies and that Age of Outrage and all this and that. This little boy up with his hand. She said, "Andrew, do you have something you want to say?" He says, "Yes, ma'am, I do. I want to know what the Easter Bunny has to do with Jesus Christ." I thought, here's a little autistic boy was realizing that she was kind of off key because she was playing with Easter.
That's a kid after my own heart. Yeah.
You know, sometimes people don't think they know anything, but they know a lot.
Right. The point of presence here, and let me just say it because we're out of time. The phone thing. Most of us spend so much time on our phones. When we sat on the back row, Kim and I went and saw Top Gun yesterday, and we're sitting on the back row, and this is before the movie started, and everybody's got their phones out, and I was kind of already eyeing the person next to me thinking, okay, let's don't do this. It was a guy this time. I wouldn't have a problem saying, hey, come on, boss, let's turn that off right now. He was great, though. They were a little chatty, but not too bad. But these things separate people. And we need to be, very rarely today in our culture, do people experience true presence, where someone is present with them, totally focused on them. And that's part of the isolation that we feel in our culture. Not those of us who are older, as we were talking before class, we're called digital immigrants because we've kind of migrated into the area of technology. But most people that are younger than us are digital natives. They've grown up with this stuff. My grandkids have been on the iPad from a very early age. And I was talking to Nathaniel Dow because I couldn't figure out my computer, and he helped me. He was talking about his Amethyst, how she knows stuff that he doesn't know because they're natives. The part of the issue there, and it's computer screens, is that we're going to be more and more isolated from one another. And so a countercultural community says we're going to be present. We're going to be available. We're going to be with you and give you our undivided attention. That is going to be so powerful if we will do that. So my time is done. Thank y'all for being in class. I'm not sure who's going to be teaching in here next quarter. Maybe, I don't know, I'll misspeak. But look, check the printouts or check the website, and it'll tell you who's going to be here, what the offerings will be next quarter. Hey, pray for Kim and I in our transition. Also, we're going to be going to Israel in July, and we want things to be calm over there. So y'all pray for us when we go. Let's pray and we'll be dismissed. Father, we truly want to touch our culture for you. We want to be countercultural, not in the sense that we're above our culture or we're better than our culture or we're self-righteous. We want to be countercultural in the sense that we want to be able to show kindness, humility, grace, presence, to create a community here where all are welcome, where Christ is the center and love is our action. Father, help us as we strive to do that. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you all for being here.